For the next couple times we're going to be dealing with Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and Ecclesiastes chapter 6. And it deals with wealth, it deals with money. It says wealth is a good servant but a bad master. And we're going to be discussing this in Ecclesiastes 5 and 6. And it's kind of interesting, there's a Sanskrit proverb that says, to protect his rags from the rats, he got a cat. To get milk for the cat, he bought a cow. To tend to the cow, he hired a servant. And to manage the servant, he procured a wife. C.H. Spurgeon told of a bankrupt man who said he had been ruined by a new sofa. The man explained that sofa was the bad beginning. It was too fine for me. It made my old chairs and table look awful. And so I bought new ones. Then the curtains had to be replaced. The furniture in the other rooms was sold, and new articles were bought to correspond with what we had in the parlor. Soon we found that the house was not good enough for the furniture, and so we moved to a larger one. And now, here I am, bankrupt. I'm going to read this section out of the Living Bible, even though I've got it here in the New International Version. Verse 8 of Ecclesiastes chapter 5. If you see some poor man being oppressed by the rich, with miscarriage of justice anywhere through the land, don't be surprised, for every official is under orders from higher up, and the higher officials look up to their superiors, and so the matter is lost in the red tape and the bureaucracy. And over them all is the king. Oh, for a king who is devoted to his country. Only he can bring order from this chaos. He who loves money shall never have enough. The foolishness of thinking that wealth brings happiness. The more you have, the more you spend, right up to the limits of your income. So what is the advantage of wealth, except perhaps to watch it as it runs through your fingers? The man who works hard sleeps well, whether he eats little or much. But the rich man must worry and suffer insomnia. There's another serious problem. I have seen everywhere, savings are put into risky investments that turn sour, and soon there's nothing left to pass on to one's son. The man who speculates is soon back to where he began, with nothing. Verse 16, this, as I said, is a very serious problem, for all his hard work has been for nothing. He has been working for the wind. It is all swept away. All the rest of his life he's under a cloud, gloomy, discouraged, frustrated, and angry. Well, one thing at least is good. It is for man to eat well, drink a good glass of wine, accept his position in life, and enjoy his work, whatever his job may be, for however long the Lord may let him live. And of course, it is very good if a man has received wealth from the Lord and the good health to enjoy it. To enjoy your work is to accept your lot in life. That is indeed a gift from God. That indeed is a gift from God. The person who does that will not need to look back with sorrow on his past, for God gives him joy. Mom, could I have a sip of water? It was during Ignacy Paderewski's career he agreed to play a concert organized by two Stanford University students working their way through school. Paderewski's manager said they would have to guarantee a fee of $2,000, and the boys agreed, and eventually the concert was held. However, though the two students promoted and worked hard, they took in only $1,600. Discouraged, they told Paderewski of their efforts and handed him the $1,600 with a promissory note to pay him the balance of the $400. But the pianist tore up the note and gave them back $1,600. He said, take your expenses out of this, give yourselves each 10% of what's left for your work, and then let me have the rest. Years went by, and Europe was convulsed by the First World War. Paderewski struggled after the war to feed the people in his war-ravaged Poland. Amazingly, even before a request was made, thousands of tons of food were sent to Poland by the United States. Later, Paderewski traveled to Paris to thank Herbert Hoover, who headed up the U.S. relief effort. "That's all right, Mr. Paderewski," said Hoover. "I knew that the need was great, and besides, though you may not remember it, I was one of those 2 college students whom you generously helped when I was in need." Paderewski reaped a harvest he had planted years earlier. Do we recognize much of what is coming our way in a life as seeds have been sown? Later on in Ecclesiastes, we're going to read, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for it's not going to return to you void." We're saying this as a church to be encouraging and staying the course, as we've seen 7 people die in the last 2 years, and we're seeing 4 people moving away in the next weeks and months ahead, and that's discouraging. But you've got to know Florida. Florida is an area that every 2 years there's a change of people moving in and people leaving. That is just the way it is. That is Florida. I remember preachers would growl and groan, and they talked about how during the wintertime they had a full house here in Florida in their churches because all the snowbirds came down. And in the summer all the snowbirds went back, and a lot of the churches do not have Wednesday night services. We do. Some of the churches around 75 and 100 only have 2 or 3 show up on Wednesday night. And we still have a group that gathers on Wednesday night, enjoying meatloaf or barbecue chicken or whatever. Sure. Or that good old steak chili.
Is that a hint?
No, just an appreciation. But the area of encouragement is when we were in Pennsylvania, we had 2 down seasons. Wintertime, all the northerners went down south. Summertime, everybody went on vacation. So the only time we could ever do a revival meeting was spring and fall. That's the only time we can plan everybody being there. You try to plan on anything, and there's 2 seasons it was down. So 10 years in Pennsylvania fighting the cold and the freeze and all the other stuff. We come down to Florida, we kind of enjoy the warmth. We enjoy the warm afternoons. We just enjoy good old Florida weather. Our bones don't hurt. We don't have ice storms where our power's out for a week. And I sure don't miss shoveling snow and chipping through ice. I sure don't at all. It's interesting when we deal with what money is. Money can buy a house, but never a home. Money can buy a clock, but not time. With money you can buy a beautiful bed, but not sleep. With money you can buy a book, but never knowledge. With money you can see a doctor, but not necessarily have good health. With money you can buy a position, but not have respect. With money you can buy sex, but not love. We talk about the pleasure seeker cycle, and this is kind of an interesting thing. You talk about folks that are spending money they don't have to buy things they don't need to impress people they don't like. And a lot of times pleasure is there. And I was telling Sandy, we went out to eat with the Sunday school class over there with the Legacy Church. It's a lot of our Old Grove Park Sunday school class folk. And we do that periodically just to say hi to our old friends. And it's kind of interesting. You know, you go out to eat, and some folks go out to eat every day. Yeah. And I remember how some kids at the college, they go out and eat steak every weekend. And we do that on an anniversary. You don't normally do that just to go do that. We had a double date with Morgan and Judith last year. We were 49 years and they were 51 years, so we called it our 100th anniversary. And they brought us, remember that dessert we got? Theirs was twice as big as that dessert we got at that tea room. And we got, it was this big, and 2 couples. And we got 2 of them this big. And 4 scoops of ice cream. And we got 2 of these 4 scoops of ice cream. And Judith and Morgan killed theirs, and she ate the chocolate ice cream, and I ate the vanilla ice cream on ours. But I'm just thinking about how often we went out to eat, and it was expensive. It wasn't even on the restaurant. It wasn't even on the coupons we had. And we decided, let's use up our coupons before we spend any money we don't have, because we got all these coupons. We've got to enjoy. But if you notice a pleasure seeker cycle, Ecclesiastes says, "Come now, I'll test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself, and behold, that's futility." Because pleasure satiates and brings forth guilt, and guilt brings forth emptiness, and emptiness brings forth depression. So people try to busy themselves, and in the depression they get bored, and they get distracted, and then they're tempted, and then they become desperate. And so they're stimulated by the desperation to go seek pleasure, whether it's eating, or whether it's sports, or whether it's spending money, or going on shopping binges, or going on drinking binges, or any other kind of binges. But this is called the pleasure seeker's cycle. And Solomon had it all. He had all the money to buy all the food and the drink and the pleasure and entertainment that money could buy. And after it was all said and done, it was done. If you see oppression of the poor and the denial of justice and righteousness in the province, do not be shocked at the sight, for one official watches over another official, and there are higher officials over them. And it seems like everybody's got to get their cut. And Jamaica's famous for that. They create jobs just to have different fees you can pay just to support this person in a particular bureaucratic government position. And to cut through all the paperwork, they're not going to do it, because it just provides, bureaucracy provides jobs. And they've got their beds feathered, and they're going to keep their beds feathered. And so he says, don't complain about high taxes, because the new guys come in and they're going to raise them worse. I've always said this. The lottery is the government's way of taxing the poor people. And they call it subsidized fuel oil in Pennsylvania. They call it subsidized educational help in Florida. And the thing is, the money that comes in the lottery goes into education. They subtract that money from education, use it from some other boondoggle.
That is the truth.
And but that is, and the stoplight cameras is the government's way of taxing the working person, going to work in a hurry, get there in time, seeing a client, trying to make a living. But it's one way the government can tax the working people. And Solomon saw it a long time ago. We say this stuff is not fair. And we went to the tax, or not to the tax place, but over there to contest our stoplight camera stuff. And they deliberately got the stoplight cameras a half a second shorter just to nail you. Just say, I gotcha! And how many rear ends have been because of? Fewer T-bones, but more rear ends, because we usually stop on yellow at the stoplight things. But probably enough on that.
You're supposed to speed up and go through.
Hit
Right.
it harder.
I read that it's the #1 state for the lottery, and it's twice any other state is Florida.
Really?
I had a man come out here when we were doing a yard sale and had a beautiful bike. It was a heavy-duty, Huffy bike, brand new yellow paint job on it. Just looked like a $150, $200 bike. And he was going to sell it to me for $25. And anytime anything is too good to be true, it's too good to be true. Either number one, it was stolen,
Yep.
gosh.
Number 1.
or number two, he's wanting a fix. And so I'm thinking, okay, do you have a car? No, I don't. This is the only transportation you have, right? And you're going to sell the only transportation you have so you can walk. You're wondering, you can't fix stupid, Morgan. And I said, why are you going to sell your bike, your $150, $200 bike to me for $25? I'm saying this out loud. I'm not thinking it. I hope I don't offend him. And he said, well, I want to go down and buy $25 worth of lottery tickets. The man was just addicted to the lottery. hoping he's going to be walking down the beach. He's going to find a brown paper sack. He's going to kick the brown paper sack open, and it's going to be a bankroll of somebody dropped the payroll in that brown paper sack on the beach.
Yeah.
Now the Bible says in Ecclesiastes 5:10, a lover of money will not be satisfied with money. Now the lover of wealth with gain, this also is vanity. And later on in chapter 6, chapter 5 he says, take your wealth and enjoy it. Chapter 6 is saying, you're going to have your wealth, you're going to earn your wealth, you're going to up and die, you're not going to be able to spend it. And people you don't even know are going to turn around and spend it. But that's for next time. How many of you seen this tract?
What?
Okay, it says, is this success? In 1923, a group of this world's most successful financiers met at the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago. And this was put out by the Faith, Prayer, and Tract League. And it talked about wealth and money and getting it all into perspective. And I used this in a sermon I gave 40 years ago on giving. And I've got 1,000 sermons in notebooks on my shelf. And in 6 years of preaching here at Northside Christian Church, I've only borrowed a little bit of an illustration, whatever, out of a couple of them in 6 years. The reason why, those sermons were 45 minutes long, sometimes an hour long. They had 6 and 10 main divisions to them, not 3 main divisions. We read 2 and 3 and 4 chapters of Scripture, not 2 and 3 and 4 and 7 or 8 or 10 verses. It's just the way it was back then. But in this particular message, I did some Google research. They said all these facts are not true. People have been preaching, and I preached this, and they find out, well, if you really did an investigation on web page and checked into this, the stuff that you were preaching isn't all so. And they kind of ruin things. You know, you preach them in all good faith, and you say, well, these guys that all together, they controlled more wealth than was in the entire United States Treasury. These guys were financiers. They had success stories. Their success stories were published everywhere, inspiring many young people. Follow their fine examples. Just look who they were. Well, one was Arthur Cutten, the greatest wheat speculator. The other was Albert Fall, a Secretary of Interior to President Harding's cabinet. The other, Leon Fraser, President of the Bank of International Settlements. Fourth was Howard Hobson, the President of the largest gas company. The fifth was Ivor Kruger, head of the world's greatest monopoly. It wasn't a monopoly game, it was monopoly business. Jesse Livermore, the greatest bear on Wall Street. Charles Schwab, the President of the largest independent steel company. And Richard Whitney, President of the New York Stock Exchange. Now it's kind of interesting, 27 years later, 1948, this was what happened to them. Arthur Cutten died abroad insolvent. Penniless Albert Fall was pardoned from prison so he could die at home. Leon Fraser committed suicide. Howard Hobson was insane. Ivor Kruger committed suicide. Jesse Livermore committed suicide. Charles Schwab was bankrupt and had to live on borrowed money the last 5 years of his life before his death. Richard Whitney was recently released from Sing Sing prison. Now those were the stories, and according to Google search, and this one guy that talked about true or false and all this other stuff, not all these facts and all that were supposed to be all the time accurate. This guy that was supposedly insane was checked into a hospital for the insane and the infirm, and he could have been or he couldn't have been, but he had great depressions. Some of the guys were released from prison, they went back to work, and they died with $5 million on hand. So they did get some of it back, even though they lost $120 million, they still died with $5 million, so they weren't necessarily broke. And this guy, Richard Whitney, that was the guy on Wall Street, whenever the market crashed, he deliberately went out among the brokers and he bought up. As stocks started going down, he bought up deliberately to show confidence in the stock market. And he was the one that said he saved the stock market from going any worse than it did, because he brought back confidence. And that's why they made him president of the New York Stock Exchange, because he saved the stock market. Now, of course, today you don't have all these checks and balances and all that other stuff. Now, I'm thinking of some of these stories. My brother tells me a story of sitting, my brother Bill, you met Brother Bill at the 50th wedding anniversary. Somebody said, who is that guy? He always calls me his older brother. Well, he's 2 years older than me. And I call him old you-know-what, but I'm not going to say it in the pulpit.
Same thing I call my good friend.
Yeah. But Bill said he did business dealings in Hong Kong, and he was quite a speculator. But he says, here's one guy, he's worth $150 million. And here's another guy, he's only worth $27 million. And the man worth $27 million was envious and jealous of the man that had the $150 million.
Wow.
Sure.
They have it all, but they're still not happy and content with it. And they even said Rockefeller, they put him on limited income, put him up in an apartment or whatever, and they gave him a small allowance. By the time 2 years later, when he died, he had taken his allowance. They gave him just a small allowance, and he had, with his stock manipulation and his stock exchange and all that, he was a financial wizard. And he left with $2.5 million of coffee money, pocket money, tin can money in his ashtray, just sitting in there where you throw your spare change. He had over $2.5 million worth of spare change. My brother, who is the speculator, lost over $1 million. He was a millionaire once upon a time, and then when he called me up on the phone and had to lay off 21,000 employees in Hong Kong, he says, Dick, we're in trouble. Everything he owned, he threw in the back seat of his car. I might have told you this story before. He invested in wheat and oil, and he had a freighter load of Argentina wheat going over to Nigeria to swap wheat for oil. And the commissions on this exchange was about $1 million. And he just put everything into it. And a French Exocet missile sunk that freighter to the bottom of the ocean. And of course, when you're running trade ships, merchant ships through war zones, try to get insurance. I don't even care, if it's Lloyd's of London.
Wow.
You know how big Lloyd's of London is? Pretty big insurance firm. You know who insures this Northside Christian Church? Lloyd's of London. They're the only one willing to accept our liability. They're cheap. They're cheap compared to the other competitors, but anyway. Sweet is the sleep of the one serving, regardless of whether it's little or much that he eats. But the plenty belongs to the rich one, is not permitting him, but the plenty belong to the rich one, is permitting him to sleep. It is kind of interesting. We talked about these millionaires, magnates, who all died in pitiful shape. But however, in the year 1923, that same year where these guys gathered together, the PGA champion and winner of the most important golf tournament in the United States Open was Gene Sarazen. What became of him? Now listen up, this is interesting. Gene Sarazen, same year these magnates met, played golf until he was 92. He died in 1999 at the age of 95. He was financially secure at the time of his death. The moral: quit work, play golf, live longer, and be better off in the end. And all the people said,
Amen.
Amen.
And as he came forth of his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. I had an elder in the Pennsylvania church by the name of Chester Hott, and he'd never had a big education. I think he went through 8th grade. One of my elders was a Democrat. He was a teamster that worked the mines, bossing the coal mines. The other was a Republican. He hauled coal. And so one of my elders was a Republican, one was a Democrat in the coal mining thing. And my old Democrat elder would always tell me this: Preacher, if your shoe fits, lace it up. Preacher, If you tell that to a mule, he'd kick your head off. Preacher, when you die, they bury you in your suit that don't have no pockets in it, and you never seen a U-Haul trailer pulled behind a funeral hearse. You know, those are words you kind of remember. A young preacher, 30 years old, listening to wisdom. You come naked from the womb and you return the same way. And you're not going to carry any of your labor with you. Yeah, you might buy a fancy casket and bring some of it with you, but other than that. Here's what I've seen to be good and fitting, to eat and to drink and enjoy oneself and all one's labor in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life which God has given him, for this is his reward. And we're back to take your money and enjoy it and spend it.
Yeah.
I've seen bumper stickers. I'm spending my children's retirement. And I'm looking at that. My children leveled with me and says, Dad, all your collections, get rid of. We don't want to have to wade through it all.
Ours is the same.
And so I'm going through selling off all my collections.
Yeah, I don't want them. Yeah.
And putting together some other collections.
We're going to Jamaica, laying on the beach.
Yeah, you know how long it's been since I've been to Jamaica and laid on the beach?
Sunburned too bad for that.
I think it's been about 10 years ago. I get sunburned too
We
bad.
went to the beach when we went with you.
Yeah, we did. We did a short time. Yeah, we usually have one day of R&R. But it's still, God says, go ahead and spend it.
Yeah.
How to be healthy and successful. Money can buy and can't buy. Money can buy amusements, but it can't buy happiness. It can buy bed and not sleep, books and not wisdom, a clock and not more time, companions but not more friends, finery but not beauty, food but not appetite, a house but not a home, medicines but not health, a ring but not love.
Wow.
Ecclesiastes says, moreover, when God gives any man wealth and possessions, enables him to enjoy them, to accept his lot, and be happy in his work, this is the gift of God. I'm going to close with this one story about an old man who lived in a tiny village. And although he was poor, he was envied by all because he had a beautiful white horse. Even the king coveted that beautiful white horse. A horse like this had never been seen before. Such was its splendor and its majesty and its strength. People offered fabulous prices for the steed, but the old man refused to sell it. This horse is not a horse to me. It's like a person. How could you sell a person? He's a friend. He's not a possession. How could you sell a friend? The old man was poor, and the temptation was great, but he never sold the horse. Then one morning he found that horse was not in the stable. All the village came to see him. You old fool, they said. We told you that someone would steal your horse. We warned you that you'd be robbed. Now you're poor. How could you ever hope to protect such a valuable animal? It would have been better to have sold him. You could have gotten whatever price you wanted. No amount would have been too high. Now the horse is gone and you've been cursed with misfortune. And the old man responded this way, don't speak too quickly. Say only that the horse is not in the stable. That is all we know. The rest is judgment. If I've been cursed or not, how can you know? How can you judge? And the people contested, well, don't make us out to be fools. We may not all be philosophers. But great philosophy is not needed. The simple fact is your horse is gone and it's a curse. The old man spoke again. All I know is that the stable is empty and the horse is gone. The rest I don't know, whether it's a curse or a blessing. I can just see a small fragment of life. So the people of the village laughed. They thought that the old man was crazy. They'd always thought he was a fool. If he wasn't, he would have sold the horse and lived off the money. But instead, he was a poor woodcutter. So the old man cut the wood, dragged it out of the forest. He sold it. He lived hand to mouth in the misery of poverty. Now he had proven that he was indeed a fool. But after 15 days, the horse returned. And with the return of the horse, he brought a dozen wild horses with him. Once again, the village people gathered around the woodcutter and spoke, old man, you were right, and we were wrong. What we thought was a curse was a blessing. Please forgive us. The old man responded once again, state only that a dozen horses returned with him, but don't judge. How do you know this is a blessing or not? We just see a fragment of life. We don't know the whole story. We can't judge the whole book until we read only one page of the book. You don't know the whole book. You read only one word or a phrase. Can you understand the entire phrase? Life is so vast, yet you judge all life with one page or one word. All you have is a fragment. Don't say that this is a blessing. No one knows. I'm content with what I know. I'm not perturbed by what I don't. Maybe the old man is right, they said. And they knew it was a blessing. But the old man had a son, and an only son, and the young man began to break the wild horses. And after a few days, the young son fell from one of the horses and broke both legs. Once again, the villagers gathered around the old man and cast their judgments. You're right, they said. You proved you were right. The dozen horses were not a blessing, they were a curse. Your only son has broken his legs, and now in your old age you have no one to help you. Now you are poorer than ever. The old man again spoke. You people are obsessed with judging. Don't go so far. Say only that my son broke his legs. Who knows if it's a blessing or curse? No one knows. We only have a fragment. Life comes in fragments. It so happens that a few weeks later the country engaged in a war against a neighboring country. All the young men of the village were required to join the army. Only the son of the old man was excluded because he was injured with 2 broken legs. Once again the people gathered around the old man, crying and screaming because their sons had been taken, and there was little chance that they would return. The enemy was strong, and the war would be a losing struggle. They would never see their sons again. You were right, old man, they wept. God knows you were right. This proves it. Your son's accident was a blessing. His legs may be broken, but at least he's with you. Our sons are gone forever. The old man spoke again. It is impossible to talk with you. You always draw conclusions. No one knows. Say only this. Your sons had to go to war, and mine did not. No one knows if it's a blessing or a curse. No one is wise enough to know. Only God knows. So we know the old man was right. We only have a fragment of life's mishaps and horrors. They're only a page out of a grand book. We must be slow about drawing conclusions. We must reserve judgment on life's storms until we know the rest of the story. I don't know where the woodcutter learned his patience. Perhaps it was from the woodcutter in Galilee. For it was the carpenter who said, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. He should know he is the author of our story, and he has already written the final chapter. And the final chapter says, we win. Wisdom from the book of Ecclesiastes. Oh, that we can learn to be content with life and the cards God deals us. Never complain. Just take it a day at a time. And know God still loves us. Brother Glenn.